Welcome to Product Innovations, where we share the latest updates to PTC Technology Solutions.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Hartman, a Director of Product Management here at PTC, and I'm joined by my colleague Laura Estey, a PTC Solutions Consultant, to discuss requirements management for Agile teams. Feel free to post any questions during the presentation using the designated Ask Questions section on the left side of your screen. We will try to answer all questions individually, but if we're unable to get to yours, you'll receive an answer in email after the session. So let's get started by addressing some questions that have come up in conversations with customers. So Laura, why are requirements management processes often broken?
I don't know if I would say they were broken. I would just say there's a lot of challenges with what people assume that they're supposed to do with requirements management. Often the first thing they do is they adopt a process that's very similar to Waterfall or just Waterfall. And it makes sense. It's beautiful on paper. You get to design exactly what you want in the beginning. Then you plan out your dates for how long it's going to take development. You plan out your dates for QA and you release. You get to tell your customers everything that you're doing. Beautiful on paper, but that's not actually realistic for how the real world works. You have things that happen outside of the world. You have cybersecurity issues come up. You might have regulations come up in different states that change what your stuff needs to do. You also have a lot of changes that will happen within development. Once you start working on something, as much as you think that you designed it out, you're just going to see that either something is possible or something is not possible the way you thought. So that changes your requirements mid-release, mid-scope.
Also, we live in a world where customers today have changing demands. And so for a lot of our customers for PTC, that serve their direct customers, whether it be in the automotive industry, they have changing customer demands and needs and different configurations and things that they want with the product. And I think oftentimes thinking about Waterfall, having those requirements up front is not always feasible given the change in market or customer demand. And so the ability to react to those changes quickly is something that's really missing, I think, in requirements management today. The other big key area, I think, is around how those changes to requirements get communicated. And a lot of that is often probably very manual or done in specific systems that aren't necessarily connected to each other.
And it's very hard as somebody that is a developer to have access to what those requirements were in the entirety or what has changed. So as a requirement changes, being able to see how that might affect future plans and current things that already happened. So you already finished some set of development and the requirement changes. How do you even know how to change what your future is working on and what to go back and reconfigure?
Yeah, so we hit on Waterfall and a lot of the challenges with requirements management. Let's take a little bit of a different lens and think about, what are some of the challenges to Agile requirements management? Because I think we paint that as a picture of, Agile is better than Waterfall. And there are certainly customers that are in both sides, and then there are some that are kind of right down the middle. But if we think about Agile requirements management and challenges, especially more in kind of safety critical type of industries, like a lot of our customers that we work with.
That's a very good question. Starting with Agile, it does allow you to overcome some of those hurdles that we talked about a few minutes ago. When you do have to change something mid-project, Agile methodologies have the ability to go and kind of rescope. You get to take something and say, what is my priority? I'm working on it. The ability to change a priority is there. But you still have some of these hurdles, which is if you're just doing Agile methodologies and you don't have that straight related back to the requirements, it's very hard for those teams to know exactly why they're making a change. So going strictly Agile is not the silver bullet. You still need to work with your group, with your process, with your organization, and know what your industry is. One of the main things that happens, I touched upon it earlier, is cybersecurity. That is always changing. You almost need to just have a bucket of cybersecurity changes, and within your process to go back every sprint, every mid-release, every iteration to say, what is the world with cybersecurity, and have that as part of your process.
Definitely. Yeah, you mentioned cybersecurity regulations. I think we've got kind of one coming up for enforcement this summer around cybersecurity as it relates to automotive, both in kind of the product development and design process, as well as kind of on the software side of, how do you then deploy those changes quickly, kind of over the air. I certainly think we've got regulations in the med dev space as well, and a lot of times all of those are constantly changing and shifting. Especially kind of as the world changes and new risks emerge, then we have sort of new regulations that our customers have to tailor to. Something else I really picked up on in what you said is around process, right? Like people and process. And I think those are two very challenging things for requirements management or for Agile requirements management in general, right? Like you've got people and process changes that have to take place. You have to have, your people bought in, on board, collaborative, communicating with each other, and a clear process of which they follow and get into kind of a regular rhythm and cadence in how they do requirements management all the way through kind of release planning. So I think you hit on a really good couple of points there when you think really about this high-level planning and how you have a process in place to really execute and deliver on that.
You don't want to get too stuck into processes. What I often see with Agile teams is they have their work, it's prioritized, they start working on it, and they consider it done. The process needs to be flexible enough so that you have different teams able to collaborate with one another. So you really want to make sure that you have this balance between being shielded from the outside world, yet still communicating with other teams that are working on the same product, just to make sure that you are able to have reuse. People aren't doing the same thing in two different teams rather than collaborating. So again, being able to have as part of your structure and part of your Agile process, this collaboration built in, this flexibility for people to work on something or help another team is actually really important.
Yeah, and I think what we've heard from customers and kind of from market trends is that for a lot of larger projects, right, that maybe involve a lot of different people, the kind of Agile way of working, if they can develop that, often have 2 times the success rate than maybe, I don't know that we would say a waterfall process, but say one that's more kind of upfront and rigid. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, for sure. Awesome. So great conversations around kind of requirements management and Agile. And now let's turn our attention a little bit to how is Codebeamer helping to get these companies and assess and help these companies become more Agile?
One of the things I love about Codebeamer is the transparency. If you are somebody creating the requirements, you can see all the way down, because it's within the same application. It's in the same tool. You can see all the way down to what is happening in the engineering world if you want to. And the same happens from the engineering world. You can see all the way up to the requirements. You can see everything. Having everything in one tool, it means that you don't have to learn a new tool. You don't have to have a separate login to be able to see what somebody else is doing. You can see the updates. We have a lot of the built-in framework for Agile in this way. So we have things like Kanban boards, we have sprint planning. But the other thing that we really have that's beautiful is the traceability. So if something does change in a requirement, you can see all the way down, almost like trickling down everything that could affect. And this does take human interaction to look at each thing and say, how does this change what the product might do? Do I need to go back and rework something, or is what I did good enough for this requirement? So we have requirements, engineering, and traceability all through validation.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, and I think by even having that, it helps us to be able to kind of rapidly gather kind of customer feedback, customer needs at a requirements level, or even regulations, things like that that need to be built in, and see how those make their way kind of through the system, whether it's through to the test cases and how those are getting validated, or even all the way through, like you mentioned, the bill of material, right down to the parts level. Maybe within Windchill, to be able to see that traceability from both ways, which is huge, I think, for those users and personas on both sides, right? Whether it's your engineers, your system engineers, your requirements engineers working in Codebeamer, or it's maybe your CAD engineers, your design engineers working in Windchill. Both super kind of critical pieces to making sure that the tool chains are not disconnected, like we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. And something else we didn't touch upon is how do you handle releases, variants, and then shared requirements? Sometimes what I've seen in the past is when you create a variant, you just take everything that you developed for one and you copy it over and you have it for the second one. So we have had customers in the past have something where they have a lot of tests. They make some changes and those tests are failing. The engineers spend months making it so those tests no longer change, but those tests have nothing to do with the requirements for this release or this variant. So being able to track requirements and this release, meaning like it could be the model year, it could be an actual software release, or a variant, meaning you have something where you have the same product, but it has different options and different SKUs for how it's sold. Those being tied to releases all the way through the product and the verification is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think we've heard from some of our customers around, data visibility, right? The ability to see information into that, right? Whether it's through reuse and being able to map kind of one-to-one from a requirements to a test case, and certainly making sure that all requirements have test cases and there aren't open requirements with no test cases or validation, but also the reverse, right? When you are reusing something, making sure that you're not just taking kind of a copy paste and then maybe you don't have a requirement for that test case. And that's, something else that I think this kind of traceability and kind of ability to sort of audit between your requirements to your test cases help make sure that no one is left alone, if you will, by themselves. We have requirements that have test cases aligned to them. Makes a ton of sense. And I think we've heard that a lot from customers. Can we think a little bit more about how we can manage change management within Codebeamer and how this sort of traceability really helps with the volatility of changes, the changes that come from customers kind of midway through? Like, how does this traceability help us be able to see what's the impact of that change?
So when you're setting up your project, you have to have both your process set up and your culture set up internally in your company. And you also have to have that match your tool. So this isn't you put a tool in place and everything is perfect. You have to have those go together. You have to have what your goals are. So if reuse is one of your goals, that is how you're going to set up your application. That's how you're going to set up your projects and your releases. If you do not have reuse as a goal, it's just not going to happen. An engineer is going to look at a requirement and they're going to say, I'm an engineer, I can build that. And they will literally reinvent the wheel. Like, we have had customers that have multiple extra wheels because they haven't been enabled to reuse components. They haven't been enabled to see what those requirements are, to see if they match their requirements or if they could collaboratively work together. So Codebeamer gives the ability to have all of this in one space, be able to actually see from requirements all the way through verification, and be able to see that in the development world. So engineers, if they are not given that access, it is very hard for them to figure out how to get that access, who to call. If you have it there, I've said it many times, as engineers, we're lazy. We just want to go the easiest way. And if something is already built, we're going to use it if we can get access to it. If we have to call a dozen people, read 15 documents, find 2 other different tools to figure out if that was the right thing, that's a lot of work. Less work is to re-engineer it, make a new product.
Right, yeah. On the kind of point about if we have to go search and find and dig everywhere, right? That's, I think, probably the challenge with, are you managing your requirements in Excel or the variants in Excel, or are you managing them in Word or something that you've got to go through and find and dig?
SharePoint, you have to click, you have to ask for access to be able to see it. And as an engineer, if it's not all laid out and that's the latest, you don't know that's the latest, so you don't know what that requirement is tied to. Having a requirement tied to a release lets them know, is this something that is actively being worked on? Is this something that is completed? I can see who the owner is. I can pick up the phone. Nobody picks up the phone. I can go on Slack. I can go on Teams. I can go on any other chat to be able to contact the person that they're working on and see if we can collaborate.
Okay, so what are some tips for adopting Agile methods for product development?
Have your goals. If you don't have goals and you're just ticking off, this is what Agile is, you're going to find yourself not really going anywhere. You need to know, what are the pros from Agile that you want to take. You are not going to get all of the pros of Agile with none of the cons. And I have seen in the past people want all of the pros from Waterfall and all of the pros from Agile and none of the cons. That is probably the first thing that I've seen that it's just not going to happen.
Right.
So have your goals. Is reuse a goal? Is quicker time to market a goal? Is collaboration a goal? And go from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think once you've got your goals aligned, then it's around kind of establishing and forming those teams that are aware of, these are the goals, this is what we're striving towards. And so making sure those teams are aligned to the mission, if you will, and sort of the investment themes and direction that you're marching towards is really important. And then having the right shared tool, as we just spent a lot of time talking about kind of traceability and visibility and accessibility to data, making sure that there's a common tool across those teams to really help enable them. So I think that makes a ton of sense, is kind of set the goals, make them very clear, recognize that, yeah, this is going to be a change, right? I think that's another key piece, is recognizing that there certainly is a change management piece to this from
There's
people.
Human change,
Totally.
There's software change, and then there's going to be a change in how you do things. And there really needs to be a lot of open communication of those pros and cons. So you cannot say, we are going Agile, you are going to have all of this freedom to be able to change priority, without saying, we may need to go back to the customer and reset their expectations on when a particular feature is going to be there. There needs to be trust between both the people setting the priorities, setting the requirements, and setting the features with the people that are working on them. If they say this is actually impossible and they're told it doesn't matter, you still have to get it done by this time, then you're really losing that trust. You need to have, again, if you have the goals, you tell everyone these are the pros and these are the cons, and you lay it out there. Nobody wants to miss a feature. But part of going Agile is having that freedom to say, we can do this well, we can do this well, and we can do this well, but we might drop this third thing.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think we also have, I think sometimes there's maybe misconceptions around Agile because you are working iteratively and you are working kind of at a fast pace. That doesn't necessarily mean sacrificing on quality, right? Quality is still very important when it comes to Agile.
That is a key function of Agile. One of the main methodologies of Agile is every time somebody does any bit of work, they also do the verification work. So when you check in a story, you are also checking in the test to ensure that that story is right. What I love about Agile with requirements management is they get to look at their story and they get to make sure it maps exactly up to that requirement so that when they do the test, they're not just spot checking their checkbox, my code works, they're spot checking my code works in this context. And I think that's incredibly powerful. So we're working on this balance of an agile team being shielded but from the outside world, but they're not a silo. They're not shielded in a way that they don't have access to the information. They're shielded in a way where they get to work on what they're working on, but they also are fully able to collaborate, able to see everything that is part of the requirement for that piece of work that they're doing.
Yeah, I think something that's really important that you just hit on, and it's what reminded me, is around, the importance of user stories in Agile, right? Because you want those that are working on the product, those are working on pieces of code or developing that piece of hardware, you want them to understand from a user needs and a customer needs perspective. And I think the user stories really help kind of bridge that gap if they're not maybe directly interacting with customers. So getting kind of all of the stakeholders, right, engineers included, business that's maybe representing customer included, and writing those user stories as part of the Agile process and as part of developing requirements is another really key piece to Agile, and one that certainly can't be overlooked when it comes to implementing Agile for product development.
Yes, they definitely get to see the entire big picture, and they get to see it in the scope of what they're working on.
Completely agree. Yeah, so I think we hit on, the people side of things when it comes to tips and tricks for developing and kind of establishing your Agile process. I think we hit on process quite well. Maybe as we think about technology and the right tools in place to then maybe implement Agile, but also making sure that you're keeping track and processing throughout the course of your, whether it's a sprint or whatever it might be, what are some tips around the technology and the tool set space that really help facilitate the process and the people kind of coming together?
So I would think about it probably like an onion, where you go from the core, and as you're working in more of the Agile framework, and I'm just going to call that where you have your sprints, you have your Agile team, you have your measured capacity, and you have your backlog. With Codebeamer, we have the Kanban board, we have the ability to do backlog grooming, and as you're working on that, you can always go to that next layer of the onion out. I know we normally talk about onions where you go from the outside in, but let's talk about it where you're going from the core part, and then they can go to that next layer. They can see, is this a system requirement? And then they can go to that next layer and say, oh, is this a customer requirement? So they can use our traceability to go up those levels, which is really another layer and another layer and another layer, and they can see the whole onion.
To your point, we do often talk outside in, but focusing really on those core pillars of Agile and what's most important for Agile, whether it be it's really kind of formed around your sprints and your Agile teams, and then you've got your requirements, but there are a bunch of layers of those requirements, and you'll move out to each of those. And I think Codebeamer does a good job of allowing very clear visibility into what are these requirements. Are they systems? Are they hardware? Are they software requirements? Whatever it might be, and kind of working from inside out makes a lot of sense.
And some of the neat pieces of using Agile with Codebeamer is we're talking about releases. Releases are not always to an end customer. Your release can be to another team. So you might have a release where you have some functionality and it is within software so that it can go to the hardware team and they can do their testing. A release is not a release to the outside world always. You kind of have to rethink about how you do things, but now we can talk about Agile and working from software to hardware and then to the end customer.
Yeah, that's very valuable. I think that you highlight a really good point that releases are not always directly out to the end customer, especially as we have more of these multidisciplinary teams, but also kind of this idea of like system of systems, right? Where everyone's kind of working on different components of what will be sort of the grand release, be it a new model of a car, a new model of a truck, a new, medical device, piece of equipment that's going out.
Or even something when you have core and you have UI.
Yeah.
There needs to be core changes before UI can start, well, not start, but finish working and testing it. So you can have any set of teams in disciplinary where you are handing something off to another team, and the Agile methodology of being able to define a date that you're going to hand something off, and then you're going to be able to tell them what you handed off. And again, the freedom to say, okay, well, we got these 3 things done, but we don't have the 4 things done, but you can see where we are with the 4 things. So we have these teams able to work together. They're able to see what each other is working on. We're able to see what their requirements were, and some of them might be shared requirements.
Yeah. I think that's important for teams that are doing their work. It's also important at kind of a release manager level or even at executive level to have visibility into, here are kind of the components of my release, and this one's done, or these 3 are done, but this one we're still waiting and pending on. And in some instances for customers, that could be the last piece before they can ship it out to the customer, and making sure that that's all planned kind of to move on the same train is really important. And then the visibility to see how progress is being tracked across the different teams and across the different kind of components and input to the release.
And that's actually really powerful for somebody with decision-making capabilities.
For sure.
To see which pieces of the project are on time and which pieces might need a readjustment in capacity. Being able to see that earlier versus it's 2 weeks before a customer is expecting it and they're finding out from a meeting, rather than being able to have it automatically in there. They're finding out and they're like, well, what can we do in 2 weeks?
Yeah, when we talk about faster time to market, right? This is what gives you that visibility into how do I deliver faster or on time to my commitments out to the market. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Awesome. Any kind of closing thoughts, advice for folks around how do we think about Agile? How do we think about kind of Codebeamer in this picture of helping really deliver to your customers faster or with, reduced costs when it comes to eliminating rework because maybe you didn't see the requirements, you didn't know, and so you created a change that has impact upstream?
I would say it is a change, but go into it optimistically. 10, 15 years ago, it was hard to talk people into that because we didn't have as much proof that this works. Now, we know a lot of best practices. We have a lot of tools that are really built around this methodology. Have an open mind and have your goals. You're not going to have all of the pros and none of the cons. Recognize what you're giving up and what you're getting, and know that that goal works for you.
Completely. Yeah, I really like that a lot. I think it's a good place for us to kind of end and land on, it's a change. Moving to Agile is a change. It's not something you flip a switch kind of overnight and, you have the perfect tool in place, but there are a lot of things beyond the tool. There are a lot of people involved. There are process involved. It's a lot of it's really about a cultural change and a process change.
Big cultural change.
And recognizing kind of what the ultimate end goal and value of that is, I think makes all of the change more easily adoptable, and establishing those clear goals early on is critical. Awesome. Well, thanks, Laura. I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and gained some valuable insight into requirements management for Agile teams. Any questions we didn't address today will be followed up in an email. Thanks again, and have a great day.